Okay, the next step, once you get your project dry clamped, and that is without glue, is now to add glue. So what you want to do is take your clamps off, take your board that you cut that was in the middle, move that, and it's time to apply a little bit of glue. Now, when I say a little bit of glue, that doesn't mean you're at the IHOP and you go over and you squirt pancake syrup all over the place and have it running off the plate. You have to remember one thing: glue and stain and do not mix. So when you go to put a wood finish on this, and if you have marks all over your paper, I don't know if you can read this from here, but it says glue and stain do not mix. Now there's dust on this, so let's wipe it off. But that here is painted in glue. So the glue seals the wood. And when it does that, now it's not going to penetrate, the stain's not going to penetrate inside of those areas, and you are not going to be, it's going to look terrible. So you have to make sure that any glue that you get on your project that isn't in a seam or not going to be seen, you want to make sure that you get that off with a wet rag, and you have to scrub it vigorously. That means as if you're sanding it with the 100 or 200 grit sandpaper. So once you get that, what you want to do is you want to get glue on every area that's going to touch. So this touches inside of here, and it also touches along this edge. The stretcher touches along the bottom part of the seat of the footstool. So what you want to do is you want to take this, you're going to take a little bit of glue, you're going to put it on the seam here. Now, about an 1/8 inch bead is all that you need. You don't need to cover that whole thing. The way you cover that whole thing is to take your finger like you did when you were gluing your boards together when you first originally started this project, and you're just going to put a nice skim coat on there, a nice translucent skim coat. Try not to get it over the edges. You're going to get a little bit that squeezes out. It just happens, but then you just take a rag and you can go ahead and get that stuff off. So I'm going to take that little bit of glue. Make sure that you don't touch your project with the finger that you just wiped onto the stretcher. And now you're going to line up the dot that you put on here and then the line with that stretcher. So there's a dot here and a dot here, and then there's a line at the end of your stretcher the same way that you dry clamped it. You'll take that there and that there, and what I do is I just push that in place. Now don't be afraid to put a little bit of pressure on it. And what that'll do later on is keep it from sliding. So push down on it, get a little bit of pressure on it so that it doesn't slide. There we go. And you can see it just starts, I don't know if you can see on the camera, but it just starts to squeeze out a little bit of glue, which isn't a big deal. The next thing I want to do is I want to put a little bit of glue inside of my dado. Now I don't need to go all the way to the end. You have to remember that these don't go all the way to the end. There's a gap here. So I'm going to put a little mark on how far I need to go, roughly, so that I don't get glue where I don't need it. There we go. Now I'm going to take a little bit of glue. I'm going to squeeze that inside of each one of these dados. And I want to try to get it up on the edge of those dados too. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab a little piece of wood and just kind of push it around in there. You just give it a little here, a little bit there. And then I'm even going to stick a wee little bit of glue on here, just a touch, because this is all going to get glued too. Not much, just a little bit. And then we're going to wipe that around with your finger as well. So, and that will get it on every area that's going to touch. We can even put a wee little bit up this here, as that's going to touch as well. Now if you go ahead and you make a big mess with this, you're going to have a lot of work later on sanding. So I'm going to grab a little piece of wood. This will work here. I'm just going to break a little piece of this off, and I'm just going to use it as kind of like a squeegee, just to push it around inside of that dado, get it up on the edges. And you got time to work with glue. Not forever, but you have some time. You know, you don't have, if you start gluing something together, you have a little bit of time before it's going to dry. Usually it takes about 15 minutes before this starts to set up. It takes 24 hours to dry completely, and it takes about 30 minutes before you can take clamps off somebody's project. So we're just going to take and get that around all the areas in there. Try to get every area that's going to touch and get glue on it. Same thing in here. Take this out. Then we're going to take it around this stretcher. Same thing over here. Try to get it up on the edges where it belongs. And I can get a little bit more on the edge of this. Doesn't have much, I can go a little bit more. There we go. Maybe even a little more under there. You can always add more. It becomes a pain when you add too much, and it starts to squeeze out all over the place and all over your project, and you have to scrub it for, and people always decide that they're going to do this at the end of the period. You always want to glue to start the period, not the end of the period. If you run and you're running short on the bell and everything else, you're going to be running into a big mess, and you're going to come in the next day and you're going to say, Mr. Wells, why is my project apart? Because sometimes I'll pull them apart so that you can clean them easier, because it's going to be hard to clean them if you let them sit there and dried glue all over the place. So sometimes I'll pull them apart if I see it's going to help you out later on. Now I'm going to take these. Now normally you could also put a little bit of glue on these, just a touch. Don't get crazy. Just a little bit of glue on the top edge of that. Take your stick. Make sure that you have the right side of your stretcher inside the right side of your stool. Make sure I got mine. Yep, I seem to be good. And vice versa, the left side and the left side. So this is my right. I can take this here. And now I'm just going to push this down on top of there. Nice and easy. There we go. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. There's my left side, my right side needs a little help. There it goes. There it is. Okay, now I'm going to make sure I'm lined up along my dots. Now, as you can see, that one was giving me a hard time. That glue will actually make the wood swell just a little bit, so it was hard to get it down in the data, but we got it. There we go. So there's one side. Here's the other side. Make sure that you line up your centers. There we go. Then what we're going to do, remember to take our third piece of wood, stick it in the middle. That's going to keep us square. We're going to put this third clamp in the middle, squeeze our legs in. And there we have it. Check it for square. A little bit off on that side, we might need to pull it a little bit. Yeah, so what I'm going to do, there we go. There we go, that's square. And that's square. What you're looking, let me just show you what you're looking to do. You're looking to make sure you don't have a big air gap in there. Same thing over here. You want to make sure you don't have a big air gap. If you do, something's wrong and you got to retry. Now what you want to do is you want to get a rag and anything that squirted out. Let me get a wet rag here. And anything that squirted out, for example, I don't know if you can see this, but I got a little bit on the end of my stretcher there. So I'm going to take this and I'm gonna rub that vigorously to get that off of there. It's gonna make my life a whole lot easier later so that I don't have to sand it. It's easier to wipe wet glue than it is to try to get rid of dried glue. Then you're gonna go in here. Sometimes when your stretcher moves around, you have some trouble with that. There we go. Get in there. Take a look around everywhere. Now if you see, I got a little bit here, so I'm actually going to take this piece of wood that I had and pull that out of there. Then I'm going to take my rag and wipe that down because I'm going to glue a block of wood in here later. And another thing you need to realize, dried glue doesn't stick to wet glue. So if it seals it, you actually would have to go back through and chisel that out of there so that you came back down to bare wood. If you didn't, you're going to end up trying to glue and put wet glue on top of dried glue. Well, the only reason glue works is because it penetrates the board. But if you seal the board, it can't penetrate. So there we go. I got a little bit on the outside edge over here. I want to make sure I get rid of that. If you take your time while you're doing this, your project's going to turn out pretty good. If you don't take your time while you're gluing, you can ruin all the work that you just did. And think about all the stuff that you just did in order to get to this spot of the project. You had to glue boards together, you had to get boards, you had to cut them, you had to glue them together, you had to join them, you had to plane them, table saw them. There was a lot of work to get to this. Then you had to form your semicircles, your mortises, route your edges, cut your dados, get your stretcher. You have a lot of work up to this point, and that's why I stress to you, make sure that you take your time while you're gluing. And make sure you take your time while you're sanding, and your project will look the best it possibly can. But if you don't take your time and you rush it, you can ruin your project in an instant. There we go. I'm good and square. That's how you glue it. You let this sit overnight. This is not the final stage of the project. We still are going to add dowel pins through this to add more strength. And we're also going to add dado plugs to cover our dados. So that's how you do your footstool. That's how you glue it. And we'll stop you there.